Okay. So, has anybody here ever heard of René Descartes before? Anybody? Yes.
I just heard of him because I've always been interested in philosophy. I never did any reading or anything. I was just like, oh, he said that one famous line before.
The famous line, right? Yeah, we're going to talk about that today. Anybody else heard of him before? Have you ever heard of the word Cartesian? Yeah? What are you familiar with in regards to that word? Where does that word pop up? Cartesian. Math? Yeah, math. The Cartesian coordinate system, right? X, Y graphs, and you got your slope and your line and all that stuff. Today we're looking at an incredibly influential, not only philosopher, but scientist, mathematician in Western history. We get words like Cartesian, like the Cartesian coordinate plane, like this kind of fundamental philosophical stance that we take towards the world from this guy. Incredibly influential figure, okay? You probably think in ways very similar to how he did without even realizing it, because his impact on Western history has been extremely profound. So to start, I kind of want to give you a little bit of a historical overview to give you some context as to when he's writing, why it matters, and how that informs what we're going to be looking at today. So the first thing that you need to know about him is that he was an Enlightenment thinker. Is this a word you've heard before in Western history, the Enlightenment? René Descartes was writing during a particular time in Western history in which there was, we might say, an explosion of knowledge in the arts and sciences. To help give you a better sense of that, let me trace some historical time periods for you. We can talk about ancient philosophy, ancient history, medieval philosophy, medieval history. And these times were characterized by a particular way of thinking, a particular way of life in the West. I always spell this wrong, so I have to look at it. What were these times like? Think of the medieval times. How did people act? How did they behave? What was at the center of their worldview, generally? Does anybody know?
They were kind of limited on knowledge. They believed that the Earth was the center of the universe. They didn't have like the knowledge or the means to explore and get to know the Earth was spotted or not at one point or another.
Yeah, so one of the things you're hitting on is incredibly important. They had not yet had the means or the knowledge of the kind of workings of the universe that we do now, right? But what was central, not only to the ancient worldview, which was polytheistic and tend to rely on mythology and cultural tradition to make sense of the world, the same is also true kind of the medieval period. It was dominated by religiosity. Okay? Religion played an important role in Western history, especially during this time. Okay? A lot of people were Christian. A lot of people were Catholic, right? The Catholic Church was a mecca of power and control during this age in human history. Okay? And so you might say, if you're an outsider looking in, that these people were kind of trapped in a religious way of life and religious thinking. Okay? I don't think that's the best way to contextualize it, but we can think of these times as being religious. Okay? And religion, especially Christianity, pervaded their worldview, their way of life, their understanding of things. why the universe worked the way that it did. Well, obviously, Western history doesn't stop here, right? There have been other eras, other periods of human history since then. We might talk next about the Renaissance. And again, I always spell this wrong, so. Does anybody know what the word Renaissance means? Yes?
Like renewal?
Yes, yeah. Renewal or rebirth. Exactly. This was a period in European history in which there was a revival of classical thinking and wisdom. And we might say an explosion of knowledge in the humanities. The arts, poetry, writing works in Latin. Have you ever heard the phrase a real Renaissance man? Somebody who could do it all, like a jack of all trades. That's where we get that phrase from. This period gave birth to historically influential figures like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, people who had their hands in a lot of different pots, who were kind of pushing Western society forward through invention, through their art, through their inquiries into the way the universe works. An especially important time in European history, this Renaissance period. Well, things continued to develop. People continued to question the way that the world worked. Why the laws of the universe were the way that they are. After the Renaissance period came what we might call the Age of Reason during the 17th century, in which people began to look less to religion for answers and more towards utilizing their reasoning capacities to figure out the way the world worked, leaning on logic, mathematics, and the scientific method. And this reliance on science, dependence on the scientific method, very analytical, logical way of thinking, gave birth to the scientific revolution. If the Renaissance period was an explosion of knowledge in terms of the humanities, like art, architecture, poetry, the scientific revolution was an explosion of knowledge in the scientific fields and technical fields. Here, a bunch of new fields were emerging for the first time, and others were expanding. Engineering, mathematics, natural science, physics, accounting, which you can actually say kind of was in this period as well, the Renaissance period. In any case, during this time in Western history, which you might say is around the 17th century, the scientists, the thinkers, the academics during this time period were beginning to rely less on cultural tradition, less on religion, less on Christianity in order to make sense of the world. And this trend would continue into the Enlightenment period, which you might say is around the 18th century. And this is the period in which Descartes is writing. He's writing during a period in which, to oversimplify, these thinkers are trying to throw off the dogmatic shackles placed on them by religion and mythology and instead put on the science blinders or the science lens, okay? Looking at the world through a very logical, analytical way, trying to figure out why physical processes work the way they do, engaging in chemistry, biology, physics, all of these things in order to uncover the secrets of the universe, not just trusting stories that have been handed down to them from their forefathers or their ancestors. Okay? Which is not to say that the people during this time weren't religious. They were religious, but they began to privilege more a logical, analytical way of thinking in order to figure out the way the world works, rather than just accepting stories of how the universe works on faith. So this is the period in which Descartes is writing. And like during the scientific revolution and the Renaissance period, here again we see an explosion in the arts and sciences, humanity really coming into its own and understanding the world in ways it never had before, in engineering, architecture, mathematics. It is this development, this trajectory, that has given birth to what we might call modern philosophy and science. Which so strongly influences how we behave today, the way our society is structured, what fields we think matter, what fields get funding, what fields are prioritized in the public consciousness and in academic consciousness. So all of this is to say that this development and this time period in which Descartes is writing and which he is contributing to has had a profound effect on the work that we're going to read today, his meditations. He's going to be utilizing a particular method in order to uncover how the universe works. We might say he utilizes a certain method of rational inquiry. Let me see. If I do that, can y'all read this? I write something there?
Yeah.
Okay. Rather than just accept stories of how the universe works, Descartes, like a lot of thinkers during his time, is going to apply his reasoning capacities to problems to try to figure out, why do these chemical processes happen? Why do these chemicals mix in this way? What are the axioms of mathematics? How do all these things hang together and work together? He talks about the method in another one of his books, Discourse on Method, aptly named. But basically, this is what he's going to be doing in his philosophy and in this work today. He's going to begin, when he looks at a problem, by employing systematic doubt. So he's not just going to accept stories of how things work. He's actually going to look at the problem himself, look at it from a bunch of different angles, and he's going to start by doubting what he's been told in the past about why this thing behaves the way that it does. He's going to investigate it for himself. He's going to analyze the issue or the problem, whether it's in mathematics, science, philosophy, whatever. Once he has broken down the problem into all of its unique little parts, that's literally what analysis means. If you trace back to the root, it means break down. He's going to look at all of the parts individually to understand how they fit together. He's going to perform a synthesis. What is a synthesis? If you synthesize something, what are you doing? Yeah, you're bringing them back together into one thing, into a whole. Yeah. If analysis is breakdown, we could say put back together is kind of like a synthesis. And then finally, near the end of this process, no matter what problem he's looking at, he's going to carefully recapitulate his arguments for why he thinks what is going on, how it works, etc. It's not important that you memorize what Descartes is doing here. What's important is that you just get the general feel of what his method is for doing philosophy and looking at the world. Okay? It's a very analytical, logical way of looking at the world. You investigate the problem yourself. You don't just assume you understand the way the world works because somebody told you that's how it works and you trust them. No, you look at the problem yourself. You begin by doubting the stories that have been told to you, investigating it yourself. Then you look at it critically. You break it down into all its little parts, and you're like, okay, that's that. Okay, what is this like? Okay, what are the relationships between these things? Then you bring them all back together, and then you put forth an argument for your position, or an argument for your explanation. That is basically what Descartes is doing here. And it's weird to see it explained in this way and in these terms, but isn't this what we generally do now when we try to solve a problem? Right? Whenever we encounter a problem in our lives, maybe we go to ask our parents for advice or something, but if we're doing research, let's say in a scientific field or in mathematics or whatever it is, what do? We investigate the problem ourselves. We don't just accept other people's answers to the problem. We analyze the problem. We put all the pieces back together, and then we come up for some sort of argument or justification for why now we have the view that we do. This is the general method that Descartes is going to be employing in his philosophy. And generally, insofar as, I've broken down all of these steps and explained them, this is kind of the process that these thinkers are utilizing during this time. And the process that countless people after this Enlightenment period are going to use when they encounter a philosophical problem or a scientific problem. They're going to look at it themselves, analyze it, try to see how all the pieces fit together, and then provide a justification or an explanation of the phenomenon. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of weird writing in this way. Again, it's not important that you memorize this. What's important is that you understand that what Descartes is doing and what all the thinkers during this time are doing, like Locke, who we're going to look at next week, like Berkeley, is that they're employing reason in order to understand what's going on in the universe. They're activating their critical thinking skills. They're trying to look at things objectively, analytically, logically, as opposed to faith. Okay? All right. Any questions so far? Cool. All right. Now I just want to say a few quick things about what Descartes is doing in this piece generally, and then we'll actually start looking at the essay itself. Descartes is extremely influential, not only because he did a lot of work in mathematics and science that has allowed human societies to develop, provided tools and frameworks that we still use today, but because he made explicit worldviews that a lot of people still believe today and provided arguments for them. In philosophical jargony language, we can say he laid the foundations for modern dualism and rationalism. And these are both positions in philosophy. I'll start by talking about rationalism first. Rationalism is an epistemological view. What I mean by that is, if somebody is a rationalist, they have a particular view on how they think we acquire knowledge, and what kind of knowledge matters, and what kind of knowledge we should depend on. Rationalism is the view that knowledge is primarily obtained through reason or our reasoning capacities. Here, I should say the view. I'm going to be precise. The rationalists believe that the majority of the knowledge that we have in our minds comes from our reason and our reasoning capacities through critical thinking. And they're going to say that this is the knowledge that we should depend on. Knowledge that is the output of critical thinking. That is stuff that we can rely on, that we should base human society on going forward. So, let's take a silly example. Do y'all remember doing proofs in geometry? You had to take, an axiom, and then you had to, maybe look at a figure or something, and then you'd be like, oh, okay, this follows from this follows from this. Okay, here's the conclusion, right? That's what the rationalists think that kind of our knowledge works, where we get our knowledge from. It's like our mind is doing reasoning stuff, it's doing proof stuff, and then we know stuff. It's basically how our minds work. And they think that this is the kind of knowledge that we should rely on moving forward. And you could see how this view makes sense, right? A lot of what you know or understand about the world has come from some sort of reasoning process that you've done. Right? Maybe you had to solve a problem earlier this morning, right? Where did I leave my phone again? And you started thinking. And you're like, well, I couldn't have left it in the bathroom because I don't go in the bathroom before I do this, right? And you're thinking through all the logical steps of your morning routine and where your phone could be. This is the position of the rationalists. We can contrast this view with a position that was also emerging during this time that is going to be pioneered by John Locke, who we'll look at next week, which is known as empiricism. The empiricists are going to say, no, our knowledge does not primarily come from our logical faculties. Our knowledge primarily comes from experience with the world through our sense organs, our eyes, our ears, our mouth, our sense of touch, our sense of hearing. So empiricism is the view that knowledge is primarily obtained through the senses. That seems like a commonsensical view, right? How do you know I have a white shirt on? Because you can see with your dumb eyes that I have a white shirt on, right? How do you know you don't like the taste of cilantro? Because you tasted it, right? And it tastes like soap to you, maybe. Doesn't taste that way for me, but. How do you know, there's a table in front of you? You can see and feel the table, right? It's right there. So the empiricists are going to say the majority of the knowledge that we have, it comes from our senses, from our experiences with the world. That's how we know stuff. This reasoning that we're doing, It's just kind of moving around the basic units that we get from sense experience and constructing them in different ways. Does the difference between these two views make sense? One view is going to say we obtain knowledge through thinking and rational inquiry. And the other view is going to say, nah, it's because we can sense stuff, man. Look. Ooh, there's a table there. That's how I know there's a table there. I didn't have to do a logical proof to know that there's a table there, right? I just felt it. So this is one debate that is being had during this time. And it's one that we're going to kind of work through in class as well, putting different arguments for and against these views. Descartes was a rationalist. And he puts forth in this piece a few different arguments for why he thinks rationalism is true and the relationship between the conscious mind and reality. But this isn't the only thing Descartes is doing in this piece. I'll write it here because I want everybody to see. He also laid the foundations for what we might call dualism. If rationalism is an epistemological view, that is, it's a theory of knowledge, then dualism is a metaphysical view. It's a theory about what exists. Descartes is a dualist. Dualism is the view that the universe is made up of two fundamentally distinct substances, physical stuff and mental stuff. Or what we might call matter and mind. So the dualist position is basically this. There are at least two different things that exist in the universe ultimately. There's physical stuff like tables and chairs and protons and laptops and hair. And then there are mental things like minds and ideas. And these are two fundamentally different things. They're distinct from each other. You can't reduce one to the other. All right? They're distinct. And so Descartes is going to argue in this piece. I have a body and I have a mind, and they're distinct, and you can't reduce the one to the other. You can't explain what's going on in my mind just by talking about what's going on in my brain. And the other way around too. You can talk about all the mental stuff that you want, but that's not going to fully explain what's going on in my brain and in my body. There's two different things going on here. Two different substances, is the language they use, ultimately exist, that are distinct from one another. They interact with each other, but they're ultimately distinct. Is this a view that seems kind of intuitive or commonsensical to y'all? Yes? No? Maybe so? This is kind of a view that you might see in a lot of contemporary forms of Christianity, right? They talk about the body and the soul, right? And the body and the soul are distinct. Your body's going to decay, but your soul's not going to die, right? Your soul's going to go somewhere else after you die. Your body's going to stay here. It's the same thing going on here. There's this idea that humans have a body and a mind, and these are two fundamentally different things. Even though they react and interact with one another, two fundamentally different things. Does that make sense? We might contrast this view with one that we'll look at next week by Bishop George Berkeley, but one that you're probably more familiar with in terms of what the contemporary scientific view of the universe is, which is monism. If dualism says that the universe is made up of two fundamentally different substances, what do you think monism says? Dual, two, what does mon mean? One, right. Exactly. It's the view that no, ultimately there's just one substance or underlying thing that makes up everything in the universe. Now, depending on who you talk to, they're going to say that this one fundamental substance is matter, or they might say it's mental stuff, or they might say it's something else. Matter, or mind, or some other third thing, I don't know. The important thing is that monists believe, no. There isn't two fundamental substances that make up the universe. It's just one. You can reduce everything in the universe to one underlying substance or substance. It's a confusing word, but that's the language that they use. So, for example, this is kind of the view that our contemporary scientific theories espouse. What do those theories say? Everything is just made up of matter and energy, where matter and energy are the same thing, right? Or they're interchangeable. So, a lot of contemporary scientific views, insofar as they're monist, will say, look, this thing that you think you have, emotions, a mind, drives, feelings, goals, dreams, those are just neurons firing in your brain in a certain way. That feeling of love that you have for your boyfriend is just neuron 36B firing to 12A. That's all that it is. It's not some wooey thing. It's just a physical process that's happening. It's a biochemical reaction that's happening in your brain. Have you all heard this before? Right? So a lot of contemporary scientific views are monist. They think at the end of the day you can just explain everything in terms of talking about physical processes and physical laws. Or you can go the other way with it, like Bishop George Berkeley, who we'll look at. He thinks, everything is not physical. Everything is actually mental. And in fact, everything that you see around you, we're just all existing in the mind of God, man. Yeah, all that exists are minds and ideas, bruh. Can't even prove that matter exists, but we'll get there. So this is monism. Descartes is a rationalist and a dualist. And so we're going to see him arguing for those positions in this piece. Are you all clear on the distinctions between these views? These two are about knowledge, how we acquire knowledge. These two are about, well, what the hell is the universe made of, man? You know, what is this thing at the end of the day, right? Okay, we good on that? You following me? Okay, let's now jump into the piece for today. I asked you to read only Descartes' first two meditations. He wrote a total of 6. And I think these meditations are really cool because basically what Descartes is doing in them is he's trying to examine everything that he's kind of been taught throughout his life. And he's trying to figure out if he actually has good reasons or evidence to believe in the things that he's been taught. Because he's thinking about his knowledge, or at least what he claims to know, and he realizes, shoot, I have taken so much on board just because like people told me it was right, just because my teachers told me this was true. I haven't really actually sat down and thought through all of this stuff on my own. Let's actually see like what I can claim to know, if I actually have any good arguments for this stuff, or if I just took it on faith. And so Descartes, through these meditations, begins to go on a very difficult, arduous, philosophical journey. He is, I believe, at this point in his life, in his retirement. And he basically just goes to this house, and he's sitting there by himself, and he just starts thinking about his life. He starts thinking about what he knows, and he's writing it down. He's performing a meditation of sorts, right? When you meditate on a problem, when you're thinking about your experiences or your life. Well, he makes it clear at the beginning of these meditations that his goal is to re-examine and, as we'll see, reconstruct the foundations and justifications he has for his knowledge base. Now, what's really interesting about this project is he begins by just reflecting on his own life, reflecting on his own knowledge. But what he comes to discover is, shoot, not only is it true that I don't seem to have a lot of good reason to believe what I think I know. Like, I haven't been given the right arguments. I haven't been given the right justifications. He comes to believe that human knowledge in general is built on shaky foundations. So his meditation begins by him re-examining his own knowledge and trying to build it from the ground up. But in doing so, he realizes that there's a problem at the base of human knowledge generally. And so his project turns from a personal one into reconstructing the foundations of human knowledge more generally. And we'll get to what the problem is at the base of human knowledge in a second. But this is what he's doing. Okay, so he's trying to do something really momentous here. It starts out as a personal journey, but then he realizes, oh shit, there's a big problem here. Like, oh, we got to get this right, or else we as humans might not be able to know or claim anything ever again. So he's really trying to do something a little bit crazy here, okay? And like a good Enlightenment thinker, he's going to be utilizing reason to do this, okay? He's going to re-examine and reconstruct his foundations for knowledge and the foundations of human knowledge more generally using reason. He's not going to take anything on faith. He's not going to accept any stories of how the world works from his peers just because they're in a position of authority over him. He's actually going to look at things and investigate them and think them through critically. Okay? one of the reasons why Descartes comes to believe that there is this problem at the foundation of human knowledge more generally is because he takes a particular position on. A position that we might call epistemic infallibilism. I know I'm throwing more jargon your way. I'm sorry. This class is going to have a lot of jargon in it. Because philosophers fucking love to hear themselves talk. Epistemic infallibilism is the view that if we're going to have knowledge of something, that requires complete certainty. So, for example, did anybody drive here today? Yeah. Where'd you park your car?
Right over there, like that big building.
Can you see it from where you're sitting? Are you sure your car's still there?
Probably.
Do you know?
I'm confident that it is.
Would you bet your life on it?
I mean, I wouldn't go that far, of course.
How do you know something didn't happen to your car, right? Maybe for this class and for this example to work, I went and I fucked with your car before class, you know, and I moved it. I got my 10 buddies, and we broke the windows, and then we like literally moved your car somewhere else. You know? Like, how do you know, right? Does anybody have a pet in their dorm room? What kind of pet do you have?
A cat.
A cat. What's your cat's name?
Beelzebub.
Awesome name. Are you sure Beelzebub is still in your room? 100% sure?
I'm certain because he's kind of a coward and likes to hide and try new things.
Okay, maybe Beelzebub's a bad example. But in any case, do you see why somebody might believe this? Why, in order to know something, you have to be certain about it? Because look, it seems like we can introduce doubt into any of the ideas or beliefs that you have, right? If I just keep pressing you and pressing you and pressing you. And then you might start to think, well, shit, like, do I actually know what I just claimed to know, right? I have all these doubts about this, right? This is one of the problems that Descartes kind of gets stuck in, okay? He says at the outset, I'm trying to reconstruct my knowledge base. I want my knowledge to rest on a firm foundation. What firmer foundation could there be except knowledge that I'm absolutely certain of? Right? So that's what I'm going to build my knowledge on. Does anybody see the problem that Descartes runs into while they were reading this piece? He takes on this position and then he discovers something terrible.
Your senses can be valuable.
Right. So he begins by doubting the senses. I'll write it over here. And what were the senses again? Somebody shout it out. What are the senses? We're going to be using this word a lot in the next 2 weeks. What are the senses?
You said like eyes, feeling, smell, taste, hearing.
Yeah. Our sense organs would be our eyes, our ears, our mouth, our skin. What's the one I'm missing? Our nose. Our senses would be like our sense of sight, our sense of touch, right? Taste, smell. Touch, taste, smell, hearing, sight. There we go. So the first problem he runs into is, well, shoot, I can't trust my senses. Why? Because my senses have deceived me in the past. Have y'all ever felt a buzz in your pocket and you're like, yep, there's my Instagram notification, and you check it, no notification. Your senses deceived you. Right? You thought you got a notification. You didn't get a notification. Nobody loves you. No. Or when you think you hear something late at night in your dorm room and you're like, what is that? And it's nothing. Right? Nobody broke in. You thought it was an axe murderer. No, it was nothing. Right? Or people who are in the desert, right? They see mirages and then they go up to the oasis. It's not really an oasis, right? It's just a mirage. We see things, hear things, taste things, smell things, touch things sometimes that aren't really there. Right? Our senses fool us sometimes. So if knowledge requires complete certainty, we're not going to be able to get knowledge from our senses. Why? They have deceived us in the past. We can't completely trust them. Right? Why would you trust your senses if they've deceived you in the past? Why would you trust a friend who lied to you in the past? Right? It wouldn't make any sense. You wouldn't be able to be certain about what they're saying or what your senses are giving you unless they're trustworthy. And it doesn't seem like they are. But still Descartes thinks, okay, maybe the senses can be doubted, but maybe there are some things that just can't be doubted. Right? There are just some things that we seem to know or understand. For example, can we doubt the truths of mathematics? Can we doubt that 2 + 2 = 4? Can we doubt that a triangle has 3 sides? Can we doubt other operations of arithmetic? Well, it doesn't seem like we can, right? Until we realize that that way of mathematically understanding the world are basically definitions that we came up with, right? We defined a triangle as having 3 sides and 180 degrees. The number system that we use, we created, to help make sense of the world. So maybe even these objective things like geometry and mathematics and arithmetic, maybe we can doubt those things too. Shoot, it's starting to look more and more like we can doubt a lot of things, huh? But that's not even the worst of it. Descartes comes to the realization that if you really drill down into any idea or belief that you have, it can be doubted. For example, how do you know you're in class right now with complete certainty? How do you know you're not sleeping in your dorm room and this is all a dream? Can you know that? Can you know you're not in a dream right now? You think so? Do you have any tests, any proofs that you could give us so that we could show definitively we're not dreaming right now? Some people are like, well, in a dream, you just turn the lights on and off. Or you can't die in a dream, right? You can't die in your own dream. I've died in my own dream. Lights have worked and not worked sometimes in my dreams. It doesn't seem like there's anything that we could say or do to prove that we are not in a dream right now. Let's take it a step further. How the hell do you know you're not in the Matrix right now? How do you know you're not in a simulation? Can you know that with complete certainty? Well, fuck, guys. What are we supposed to do then? If we can't know this basic stuff about our reality with complete certainty, isn't that scary? You don't know if you're in a dream. You don't know if you're in a simulation. Do you even know if you have a body? In dreams, you have a body, right? Maybe sometimes. Maybe sometimes you're a disembodied spirit, floating around. But how do you know that the thing you're looking at right now, how do you know you actually have hands, or a body, or feet, or hair? It seems like everything can be doubted at the end of the day. Here's what Descartes has to say about it on page 7 of the reading. But it may be that although the senses deceive us, there are yet many other things to be met with as which we cannot reasonably have any doubt, although we recognize them by their means. For example, there is the fact that I am seated here by the fire, attired in a dressing gown, having this paper in my hands and other similar matters. He's thinking, look, I'm sitting right here by the fire. I'm writing this stuff down. How could I doubt that, right? It's just obvious to me. How could I deny that these hands and this body are mine? Were it not perhaps that I compare myself to insane people, devoid of sense, that they assure us that they are kings when they are really quite poor, or that they are clothed in purple when they are really without any clothing, or who imagine that they have a jar head, or are nothing but pumpkins, or are made of glass. So he's saying here, look, insane people believe insane things and doubt that they have bodies, that doubt that they're awake and all this stuff, but I'm not insane, right? I can clearly see I'm sitting here by the fire. It's obvious. They are mad. And I should not be any the less insane were I to follow examples so extravagant. But at the same time, I must remember that I am a man, and that consequently I am in the habit of sleeping, and in my dreams, representing to myself the same things, or sometimes even less probable things, than do those who are insane in their waking moments. How often has it happened to me that in the night I dreamt I found myself in this particular place, that I was dressed and seated near the fire, whilst in reality I was lying undressed in bed. Right? You've had dreams you were at school, or dreams that you were at the fair, or all these different places, right? And you thought you really were there, right? Descartes' like, I've dreamt that I've been here before doing this exact same thing. How do I know I'm not dreaming now? At this moment, it does indeed seem to me that with eyes awake, that I'm looking at the paper, that this head which I move is not asleep, that it is deliberately and of set purpose that I extend my hand and perceive it. What happens in sleep does not appear so clear nor so distinct as does all this. But in thinking this over, I remind myself that on many occasions I have, in sleep, been deceived by similar illusions. And in dwelling carefully on this reflection, I see so manifestly that there are no certain indications by which we may clearly distinguish wakefulness from sleep, that I am lost in astonishment. And my astonishment is such that it is almost capable of persuading me now that I am dreaming. So Descartes realizes that everything can be doubted, okay? And he's astonished by this. It scares him, okay? Because if everything can be doubted, then how can we know anything? How can we do anything, right? We'll just be walking around not really understanding the way the world is, just like fumbling our way through life. That's no way to live. How are we going to construct societies, develop science, engage in economic trade and practice if we don't know anything? Our lives would fall apart. We would all just die if the possibility of knowledge goes out the window. And so what does he do? He decides to make it even harder on himself. Because, I don't know, fuck Descartes, that's why. I don't know. In order to really get to the bottom of this, in order to really try to discover if there's anything that he can know with certainty, he's going to wheel out a thought experiment. Okay? Remember, he's trying to reconstruct his foundations for knowledge. And those foundations better be firm, they better be secure. He better be certain. So, he needs to find something that is absolutely certain, something that he can be certain about, that he can rest all of the rest of his knowledge on. A self-evident thing, or at least something that can't be doubted. So he comes up with this wicked thought experiment. Okay? We can call it the evil demon or the evil genius thought experiment. Does anybody remember how this goes from the reading? Do you remember him talking about an evil demon in the reading? Yes.
Well, he didn't believe that any god would just like make up a bunch of lies, so he kind of put it on this evil demon, evil genius, who just created this false reality for us to live in, kind of blamed it all on him, essentially. Like this evil genius, like put us here and like made all of this stuff up and made it seem as though things were aged and gave us false memories.
Yeah. In order to see if there's anything that he can know with certainty, this is what Descartes thinks to himself. I am going to presume that an evil demon that's all powerful, or an evil genius that's all powerful, created me, and its sole purpose is to deceive me. That's its sole goal in life, is to lead me away from the truth, to deceive me. Let's presume that is true. Let's presume there's an all-powerful evil demon out there whose sole goal is to lead our philosophy class away from the truth and into error. If that was true, is there anything that we could know with certainty? This is what Descartes is asking himself. If this is true, if such a demon does exist, whose sole goal is to deceive me, is there anything I can know? Now you might think at this point that the situation is hopeless, right? If there does exist such an all-powerful evil demon, how could we know anything? What does Descartes come to? He comes to an amazing realization. There is at least one thing that we can know with complete certainty, even if this is true. Does anybody know what it is?
That he's thinking and has doubts.
That he's thinking, and therefore, what does that imply?
He's thinking, therefore he is.
That's right. We cannot reasonably doubt our own existence. The one thing that we can know for certain is that we exist. Think about it this way. If such an evil demon did exist, whose sole purpose was to deceive us, we can know for sure that we exist because there has to be an object of the demon's deception, right? It has to be aimed at someone or something. right? Or think about it this way. The fact that you can doubt your own existence at all shows conclusively that you exist. Because if you didn't exist, you wouldn't be able to doubt your own existence, right? So that's what Descartes comes to. It's an amazing realization, okay? And the Latin phrase for this that he writes down that has now echoed throughout all of history is cogito ergo sum, which means I think, or I am thinking, therefore I exist. From inside your perspective, from where you're sitting, you can know for sure that you exist. I can't know that you exist. You can't know that I exist. But each one of us can know that the self exists with absolute certainty. Why? Well, because we're thinking about things and we're doubting our own existence, and there's perception happening, right? You see white and you feel things and all of this crap. You're sensing, you're thinking. This is the foundation that Descartes is going to try to build his knowledge back up from. He's going to say, I'm starting with this. This is something that I can know with absolute and complete certainty that I exist. If such an evil demon does exist, I can still know that I exist with complete certainty. Does that make sense? Can you see why we can know this with complete certainty? Because if you doubt your own existence, that just proves that you exist, right? If you didn't exist, you wouldn't be able to doubt your own existence, right? So, that's nice, right? We can prove that each one of us exists to ourselves. It's a good starting point, right? But where does this leave us? So we know we exist. That doesn't exactly tell us who or what we are, right? Or what we're like. Well, that's the next thing that Descartes considers. He starts thinking about, well, okay, I know I exist, but what kind of thing am I? You know, what is going on here? What is this thing I call I? What does Descartes find? Well, as he meditates on this and reflects on this, he comes to the conclusion that he is a thinking thing, or he is a mind. He uses the words mind and soul interchangeably. We kind of make a distinction between these things in our contemporary era, but he's using these interchangeably, okay? He's meaning to pick out with these terms, mind or soul, a thinking thing. A thing that does thinky stuff, okay? He says he is a mind or a soul or an understanding. Something that understands. Or a reason. That is a reasoning thing. Basically, a thinking thing. That's what Descartes realizes that he is. He is a thinking thing. A thing which doubts understands, conceives, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, which also imagines and perceives. That's the kind of thing that he is. Because these are all things that he does, right? And these are all things that we do. We doubt, we understand, we conceive of things, we affirm some things, we deny others, we will things, we refuse, we can also imagine, and we perceive things, right? You perceive motion here, you perceive whiteness here, all kinds of stuff. So he's a thinking thing. That's what he discovers what he is. Now, later he's going to go on to argue that, yes, he does indeed have a body, and he does indeed have sense organs. He's going to build his knowledge base back up. He's going to come to believe in, well, a lot of the same stuff that he believed in before. He's going to believe in the existence of a world out there, outside ourselves, that exists, right? Of buildings, of streets, of cars, of all this stuff. He does come to believe that, yes, he does exist in reality, and he's not in a simulation or something. He even provides an argument for the existence of God. He thinks God exists. But the important part of what he does at the end of the second meditation is he tries to provide an argument for that rationalist position we talked about at the beginning of class. That he knows this stuff through something his mind is doing and not what his body is doing. And I like to end class just by talking about that. He uses this famous wax example to illustrate that we apprehend and comprehend reality through our minds, not through our senses. What time does this class end? 10 after?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. Good. Means we can talk about this. And so here is what he says. This is on page 11 if you'd like to follow along. On the left side of the page. Let us take, for example, this piece of wax. It's going to be about 2/3 of the way down on the left side of the page. It has been taken quite freshly from the hive. He's looking at this piece of wax in his hands. And it has not yet lost the sweetness of the honey which it contains. It still retains somewhat of the odor of the flowers from which it has been culled. Its color, its shape, its size are apparent. It is hard, cold, easily handled. And if you strike it with a finger, it'll emit a sound. Finally, all the things which are requisite to cause us distinctly to recognize this as a body, as a material thing, as he's holding the wax, are met within it. But notice that while I speak and approach the fire with the wax, what remained of the taste is exhaled. The smell evaporates, the color alters, the shape is destroyed, the size increases, right? It melts and starts to form a puddle. And it heats up, becomes liquid, scarcely one can handle it, and when one strikes it, no sound is emitted. Does the same wax remain after this change? Think about it. If you have a piece of solid wax, you're holding it, and then you bring it up to a fire and it melts and it drips onto the floor. Is that the same piece of wax that you were just holding? What does your intuition tell you? Is it a different piece of wax? No, it's the same piece of wax, right? Now it's just in a different form on the ground, right? It was solid before, now it's liquid. So you'd say it's the same piece of wax, right, that you were holding. that begs the question, how do you know it's the same piece of wax if everything about it, sense-wise, changed? If its shape changed, if its color changed, if its taste changed, because it tastes burnt now that you burnt it, right? If its smell changed, if everything about it changed regarding your senses, how do you know it's the same piece of wax? Descartes thinks that this kind of example proves that we apprehend, that is, we grasp reality through the mind, and we understand it through the mind. We don't grasp and understand reality through the senses. It has to be something our mind is doing. It's like our mind is reaching out and just grasping reality. And so he uses this as an argument for rationalism. Somehow our mind is interfacing with reality and giving us information about how reality works and what it is like. So, primarily, we obtain knowledge of the world through our mind, not through our senses. What do you think of that argument? Is that a good argument? A bad argument? Is he doing something sneaky here? What do you think? You all gonna be rationalists now, like Descartes? You're like, yeah, his wax argument, too good, man. Going down in history, one of the best arguments. What do you think? Maybe you don't know what to think. I feel that. I don't know what to think sometimes either. I read some of this stuff, I'm like, what the hell were they smoking? You know, who would think about this? Weirdo philosophers, that's who. But it's kind of interesting, right? Okay, let's back up a bit. Let's take more of a bird's eye view. Do you understand the project that Descartes was engaged in? He's trying to investigate and then reconstruct what he knows. Goes through this long process of doubting everything and then coming to realize that even if he doubts everything, there's one thing that he can know. And he's going to use that bit of knowledge as a foundation for his entire knowledge base moving forward. And his philosophy implies, as humans, we can also use that self-evident piece of knowledge as a base of our knowledge moving forward and build off of that too. And then he puts forth two views in these meditations, dualism and rationalism. Dualism being the view that fundamentally two different substances make up everything in the universe, physical stuff and mental stuff. What do y'all think about that view? Do you like that view? Do you think it has good arguments for it? Or maybe are you more a monist? You think, no, it's either all matter or energy, or maybe when you're smoking, it's just all mental and idea stuff. What do you think? Give me some of your feedback here. I want to know what your personal views are. I'm going to start calling on people. Do you think there's a distinction between the body and the mind? Are they fundamentally different things, or no? Certainly feel like they're different things, right? Could I explain to you what cake tastes like just by describing a chemical process that goes on in your mouth? What do you think?
I guess I'm more of a dualist in the sense that there's a distinction between what we physically exist and is there versus like the mental stuff, because
Okay.
we can think thoughts and we can explain that by, the brain synapses firing, but it can't like explain the exact thoughts that we have.
The word you might be looking for is qualia. This is something that comes up in philosophy. Our thoughts, our experiences, they have a certain quality to them that you can't explain just by talking about the laws of physics and chemistry. Like the redness that you see when you look at a red delicious apple. That the quality of that redness in your mind's eye. You can't explain that with what that feels like, what that looks like. I believe was it Frank Jackson who came up with this term? It's trying to describe that quality of mental experience that we have that is not reducible to physical explanation. Yeah, maybe you think like, look, yeah, the mind and the body are separate. Like mental stuff is different than matter, right? Did anybody here think the opposite? Like, no, actually we can reduce all of this to one underlying substance or thing. Maybe you are scientifically minded and you think, yeah, we can explain everything in terms of physics and chemistry and biology. At the end of the day. Maybe we're not there yet, but maybe we'll be able to get there someday.
I think I'm more dualist because, like, I can understand, like, yeah, technically we can reduce everything down to another counter, but that doesn't necessarily mean you want to or that you should, because then it just, like, takes the, like, meaning behind it out of it. Like, it takes the emotions out of it. Like you can reduce, like, this classroom down to, like, its atoms and be like, oh, like, this is why it looks like this is how it's structured or whatever, and nothing is real because it's all just a bunch of atoms. But then, like, that takes away its meaning that, well, like, what this classroom means to, like, certain, like, people who exist in this room, and then, like, so just reducing it down to one thing just takes away all sense of purpose of it even being there. And I think to live a decent life is you have to believe that things have a sense of purpose.
And maybe, you think also like meaning is real. Purpose is real. Like it's not like meaning is fake, right? Things mean something to you, right? So maybe you could say something like, if you try to reduce everything to physical explanations don't admit of any meaning, but meaning is real, so there's something lacking about that way of doing things. Yeah, you could believe that. Yeah. But here's a question for you. This is a really hard one. It seems like a lot of you are dualists, right? You think, yeah, my mind is something distinct than my body, right? My mind is something distinct from a table, right? They're not the same thing. Well, let me ask you this. If the mind and the body are two different things ultimately, how the hell do they interact with each other? Maybe an example will help. Let's say you're playing pool, right? And you shoot one ball, and it hits another ball, and then that ball, right, goes forward, right? A collision happens. We can make sense of that because both balls are physical, right? It's a physical thing hitting another physical thing. So energy is like transmitted from the one ball to the other ball. But if our mind is not physical, how can it interact with a physical thing? You see the problem? If they're two fundamentally different things, how can they causally interact at all? Because we kind of take it for granted that the body influences the mind and the mind influences the body. But how the hell does that work if they're two different things? It's not like they're both physical, right? And they can collide or transmit energy. right?
Can your mind be both physical and mental?
Maybe. But then that just kind of pushes the problem back a step, right? So let's say your mind, we're going to use the brain image as your mind. Or let's call this your mind. Let's say half of it is physical and half of it is mental. Yeah, maybe the physical side interacts with your body, but then how do these two sides interact? Right? If one's mental and one's physical. I don't know, it's a really weird problem, right? Like, it's a weird question.
The way I think about it, at least, is kind of like taking your brain, which is a physical thing, that we have it, and comparing it and like making it equations. So like your mind is the output of what your brain is doing, is how I think about it. So like your mind is talking to you about what's going on, about what your brain is doing, essentially. So your brain is telling your body to do things, and then your mind is telling you to do those things.
So something like that.
Kind of, yeah. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but I just think like the mind is the output of what your brain is doing. So we can like take like I think you said earlier, like we can take and be like, oh, like your brain is just firing synapses. Yes, it is doing that. What you're feeling from those things happening in your brain is what your mind is your mind. So like your mind holds your emotions and stuff like that because your brain is doing it. So it's like the output of the not physical output of what your physical thing is doing.
See, that's really weird. Yeah, why? So this is physical and this is physical, but somehow, like, the physical stuff results in mental stuff that's different than physical. That's weird, right? How the hell do we explain that? It's goofy, right? Like, I don't know.
I guess we can say that your brain, mind, which I kind of see as just one thing, just converts from the two substances, like back and forth constantly. Kind of like how whenever we perceive things, our brain is constantly like converting those signals into like whatever chemical processes exist. So it's kind of like the same idea there, that it just converts between mental and physical.
And then the question is, how does it do that? Right? Which, I guess we got to throw our hands up in the air. I don't know.
Energy. I mean, if you think about it, like our bodies, we can physically do things, but in that moment of physically doing that action, it's creating some type of like, it's like I'm moving, I'm putting one step in front of each other, but I'm technically walking. Like I'm physically like going from point A to point B. It's like it's like you can't like.
It's friggin' weird, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I said, the same thing. Like if you look at it, like mine as far as like energy, or it's it's a I don't know.
I'll leave you with this, because we might talk about this later in class. I'm not sure. This problem of how the physical and mental interact is only a problem if you think the physical and the mental interact. Right? This view you can call, in the philosophy of mind, interactionism. Interactionism has this problem. How do the physical and mental interact? We can't really explain it. But you could believe this. You could believe that only mental stuff impacts mental stuff, and only physical stuff impacts physical stuff, and these two things never interact with each other. But this is also kind of a weird view, right? Because it seems like these two interact, right? Like if I punch you, you're going to feel pain, right? But maybe they're not actually interacting at all. And, God just set it up from the beginning of time to give you a certain sequence of experiences that line up with a certain sequence of physical things. This is a view that some philosophers have had. I think Spinoza. These two things don't interact, but it just so happens that, when I punch you at the same time, because God set it up this way, you feel pain. But the punch didn't cause the pain. It's kind of a weird view, right? Okay. Anyway, that was Descartes. Super influential figure. We don't have time to go through all of his stuff today. Next time what we'll do is we're going to look at John Locke, who's going to be arguing for empiricism. He's going to be saying, no, we don't get knowledge of the universe through something our mind is doing. It's just through what our sense organs are doing. And he's going to provide a bunch of arguments for that and try to get to the bottom of what ideas are and what their nature is like. Okay. Any final questions, concerns? All right. Thank you for coming. I'll let you go.